parent. Teams normally
a slowdown on
Normally their greatest strength also now came with liability. For every added member, they risked increasing how much power Lodestar could use in the fight. On the upside, since most of the physical strength was concentrated on Medley and Cold Shoulder, it did present a natural formation. We're all thinking the obvious, right? Medley and Cold Shoulder take melee to distract her, Patrick and I make a run for the rock. Cybergeek could see the lack of surprise on their faces. They'd all arrived at the same conclusion. Unfortunately, obvious means Lodestar will see it coming, too. We need to have some curves to throw her. Patrick lit up, her wide eyes practically shining. I could put the target in my hand, get rid of the weight entirely, plus I can control it. Forehead creased in effort, she focused, and the top hat perched on her head lifted up a few inches before dropping back down. This was a new talent she found recently, and while it wouldn't be zipping around the battlefield, a floating hat might very well prove useful. The problem is, she knows about all the skills we've shown so far. Our best shot is something new, Cybergeek said. Patrick's idea did stir something in his mind, a curiosity he'd held but never put to the test. Firing up the menu in his vision, Cybergeek began to zip through his options. After Tori's kidnapping, he'd been putting more effort into utility items, and one in particular leapt to mind. The self-swap from Battle Buds would be perfect, except it only lasted for 10 seconds. I have an idea, but we need to test something first. Motioning for his team to lean in, Cybergeek explained the loose collection of half-thoughts they would optimistically refer to as a plan. This was an optimal opportunity. Beth and Juan were at the store, leaving Rick and his mother alone in the house. No work to steal her attention, no upcoming meetings to suddenly run off to. If he started this conversation, her excuses to stop it were limited. At this point, Rick was no longer sure what he was expecting. After several days, the thought of oceans and examining old photos no longer triggered attacks, but the knot of unease in his gut refused to yield. Sitting down at the kitchen table across from her, Rick tried to see his mother as a person, rather than the role she filled in his life. Janet was working on a crossword, a favorite weekend activity. Given her levels of self-assurance and intelligence, would she really get mixed up with someone who had that much to hide? Maybe if she hadn't known the whole score up front. Perhaps that was even what had soured their marriage in the first place. Which meant he might be about to blunder into a very sensitive topic. Rick shook the notion from his head. He was preparing to accuse his parents of lying to him for his entire life. It would be a sensitive topic regardless of how it was phrased. The smart move would be to walk away. Except that Rick was not only the son of Ivan, Janet's blood ran in his veins as well. Her same obsessive need to solve a complex formula burned through his mind, refusing to let go of the mystery now that it had properly taken hold. Bad as things might get, he had to push forward. That realization was almost freeing, in a way. He didn't have to worry about finding the right angle of approach. This was going to be a shit show no matter how he went in. May as well cut to it, then. I want to know about Dad. Janet glanced up from the crossword, a brief squint of confusion as she noticed the serious expression on her son's face. Did you have a particular topic in mind? Might be best to speak to him directly. I'd try that, if I thought he'd give me the truth. The confusion faded from her eyes as she quickly adjusted to the situation, her Saturday afternoon slipping away. I see. What is it that you're concerned he would lie to you about? This was it, the edge of the cliff. Once Rick started down this road, there wasn't a way back. Whatever he learned, he'd have to live with it. No matter if, or how, it changed things with his parents. Well, for example, there's the fact that he spent his whole life saying he has no family, only for Vendela to list one of the other employees as his niece. Rick waited for his mother to be shocked at the revelation. Instead, she merely threw him a gaze of pure consternation. Oh, is that what this is all about? You knew? Of course I knew. He had to reach out in case anyone checked with me for confirmation, Janet replied. For goodness' sake, Rick, you're making a conspiracy out of simple charity. That girl was on her own. Life had given her a real kicking, and Ivan saw potential. They fudged the relationship to get her an internship so she could find her footing. You aren't the one your father lied to. It certainly wasn't a perfect story, opening more questions than it answered, but it did sound far more like the Ivan Rick had always known. Even the other evidence, such as Ivan getting lost in his old neighborhood, suddenly felt flimsy under Janet's reassuring gaze. His will might have broken, allowing himself to believe the lie, if not for those damn flashes from the beach. Okay. That explains one thing, Mom. One of 1,000 inconsistencies. He's never been to the places he supposedly lived. There are no pictures of him before you were married. I'm not even sure his age lines up. For a man in his 40s, he sure doesn't seem to be showing it. He's a private man with a bad memory and a good metabolism. What are you digging for here? Janet was starting to look more concerned than anything. Rick knew he was feeding that. He could already feel the sheen of sweat on the back of his neck. Answers. I want to know why my own dad has been hiding something. What's so bad that he couldn't even tell us? Why do I keep having these horrible flashes from some damn beach? It was the last one that landed. Until then, Janet's facade had remained firmly in place, but at the word beach, the mask slipped away. He could see it then, laid bare. The horror in her eyes, the terror at the idea he remembered. Something had happened. To her credit, Janet didn't bother trying to refix her false expression. Instead, she walked around the table, pulling her son close in a display of affection that left him immediately uncomfortable. You were never supposed to see that. We tried to spare you, but the block works based on desire. When you wanted to forget, you could. If you keep trying to remember, you will. I don't need a hug. Rick tried to squirm away, only to be gripped tighter. I need to know what the hell happened. She clung for a few minutes longer, then returned to her side of the table. I'm not so sure about that. Yes, Rick, something bad once happened at a beach. Yes, there is more to our family than meets the eye. And yes, your father has secrets he's not shared with his children. But most of what you know is true. Ivan and I are your parents. We love you more than the world itself, and we would do anything to keep you safe. Even what you know about Ivan is true. No blood relations, works a middle management job, all very real. None of it was false. There were just more truths than what you were given. Sometimes, knowing more makes you miserable. You think you want those memories back, but you'll wish they were gone as soon as you succeed. You think you want to know the whole truth about this family, yet if I were to tell you, would that really make things better? For a moment, he'd been able to delude himself, thinking his mother had been duped as well. Hearing her speak, it was clear as could be what the actual truth was. Whatever this is, you're in on it too. You've been helping him lie. Watch it, young man. I'm still your mother. Her voice was momentarily firm, though it was short-lived despite her mounting frustration. We both know you came to me with this because you think I'll flip on Ivan and give up the goods. What you fail to understand is that it has never been your father that I was protecting. It was you and your sister. Some truths can't be unlearned. They burrow in and chew you up from the inside. What makes you so sure I couldn't handle it? Rick demanded, voice rising. His mother's hand slapped the table, shocking him backward. Because I do remember that goddamn beach, Rick. I remember every detail, every scream, every death, and it wakes me up in a cold sweat to this day. Only after the words had burst forth did Janet seem to realize what she'd said, calming down slightly. Why would I ever want that for you? Screams. Rick was processing her words, trying to make sense of what she described. Deaths. What the hell happened out there? Maybe you'll get the chance to find out, she said, rising from the table once more. This time, it was not to embrace him, and Rick noticed she seemed to move visibly slower, like she was weighed down. This is his secret to keep and slower, like she was weighed down. Slower, like she was weighed down. This is his secret to keep and his to share, if he thinks you're ready. With one last look to her son, Janet reached into her purse and pulled out her cell phone. I'm calling your father. Chapter 44. Breaking into teams went smoothly. Every Cape present had been working in the field, leaning on one another and the trouble came. Chapter 44. Breaking into teams went smoothly. Every Cape present had been working in the field, leaning on one another and figuring out who they worked best with. In no time, they'd split apart, mostly binding themselves into units, with only a few choosing to go it alone. No one expected the solo attempts to do well, but as Lodestar had said, this was an evaluation, not a test. While winning alone might be impossible, demonstrating competence was an entirely more achievable goal. The trouble came after the groups were split up, when the natural question arose. Who do you think will go first? Lucy was staring out at the clusters of their peers, most of whom were bunched up having a similar conversation. First is good and bad. No standard has been set, so there's nothing to live up to. Downside is you're also the canary in the coal mine. Everyone else gets to see what happens to you and adjust accordingly. Ren's voice was quiet, calm. He was mentally prepared to jump in whenever the time arrived, already focused on victory. Irene didn't bother looking to the others. Her eyes had never left Lodestar's battlefield, committing every feature to memory while there was still time. I'd be fine with going first, but given our team situation, it's best if we let someone else take the spot. It was a very polite way of pointing out that there were still some pockets within the Aussie who weren't completely convinced Apollo had no corrupting influence on the Capes he'd taken special interest in. They'd been his favorites from the last confluence, and all the bitterness such a role had stirred up had found an easy outlet once he was outed as a traitor. Personally, Donald was content to take a spot further down the list. He was better at learning and adapting, so walking in with a few samples to pull from would make the task more achievable. The trouble was, he could also feel the stares of other teams on his own. People were waiting to see if they jumped on the first spot's opening, and Donald already knew there wasn't a right answer to give. If they attempted to claim it, people would say they were trying to grab more glory. Wait for a later spot, they'd be accused of making others do the hard part while they sat back learning. Even offering to slot in wherever worked best for the groups as a whole could be read as them being so confident they didn't care when they tried. No matter what move they made, fault could be found. That realization lessened his case of nerves slightly. If people were looking for a reason to dislike them, there would always be an angle to find. Donald should concern himself with what was best for the team and their training, which meant hanging back to let a more eager squad have first crack. He was just about to voice that thought when the bright blue costumes of the new science sentries stepped into view. Fear not, everyone, you no longer need to worry. The top team is going to take the opening spot, sparing you all from having to face Lodestar without watching someone else show you how to win. Presto was as untactful as usual, but to the teleporter's surprise, that actually did get quite a few chuckles. Unfortunately, he and the rest of his team noticed the laughs had all come when he announced them as the top team. Even without being able to see his features through the mask, Donald noticed the small body tense slightly. Presto didn't care for being part of the joke, it seemed. The new science sentries, who had been striding forward confidently seconds prior, suddenly lost a step as the laughter hit. Donald could see it coming, like a slow-motion car crash. He'd been a target often enough to know how this dance played out. Strong people didn't like having their egos challenged, and the realization that their team being seen as the current best wasn't just wrong, but laughably wrong, was hitting most of them in the sorest of spots. Pain turned to anger, which was funneled into action as they scanned for some outlet or place to redirect the attention. Just as he knew they would, a pair of eyes settled on Donald and his team. When lashing out, people usually went for the easiest, most obvious target, even when it could potentially work against them. Tashionic stepped forward, narrowly avoiding a hand from Agent Quantum that was meant to yank him back. Oh, I'm sorry, perhaps we should have shown a bit of deference first. My apologies, Team Apollo, did you want to display for us some of the amazing tactics he imparted? Maybe you can show us the one where superheroes lie to and betray each other. I guess now we know why Tacky is part of your name. Had it been from Irene or Ren, Donald would have been fine. The trouble was that the line had slipped out of Lucy, who leaned more toward diplomacy and kindness. The joke, silly as it was, caught Donald completely by surprise, eliciting a sincere laugh that peeled off of him, echoing through the empty surroundings. That would have been bad enough, but this was the contagious sort of laughter. Like a giggling plague, it swept through those in attendance. With Presto, there was wiggle room to interpret what had earned the minor mirth. This time, there was no such comfort. The new science sentries were being laughed at, and Donald could see two faces reddening. He'd have guessed that under the full mask, Presto probably wasn't looking too keen, either. Only Agent Quantum was keeping it stoic, though he was starting to appear visibly concerned about the situation. On that point, they were agreed. This needed to get handled, fast. Holding up his hands, Donald stepped forward, slightly outside of his group. Okay, that's enough. They took a shot, we took one back. How about we all focus on the task at hand? New science sentries, please take the first spot. We look forward to seeing your skills. By all accounts, you've got quite a set of powers. I'm sure there will be a lot we can all learn. It was a good effort toward peace, in Donald's opinion. Acknowledge the exchange and move past it, offer some ego stroking as recompense, and by giving them the spot they'd wanted. Unfortunately, the crowd was still in a chuckling mood, and some chose to interpret his words with less sincerity than they'd been spoken. More laughter sprang up, spreading once more, and with it, the faces of Tashionic and Plasmodiah both set in rage, all of it aimed at Donald. No, please, we didn't mean to offend, Tashionic said. We were trying to bite the bullet and take the worst place in the order, but since you're so fucking sure of yourself, let's see what your team can do. Assuming you tryhards can manage anything without villains around for help. The snort from Ren was pronounced and loud, something only his inhuman snout could manage. You would think that's an insult. That the idea of effort, of trying, of striving to improve is something to be ashamed of. We didn't all get handed our team and titles from Big Daddy Quantum. The rest of us worked to be here. Something in Ren's verbal jab hit home, and hard. Tashionic looked like he was seconds from racing over to throw a punch, but was stopped by Agent Quantum forcibly shoving his way past. The leader of the new science sentries locked eyes with Donald as he moved, a clear enough hint of what to do. Donald mirrored the movements, striding forward, away from his team, into the unoccupied space between the groups. In no time, the leaders met, surrounded, yet alone. 1 minute warning. 1 minute until someone's time starts. Lodestar's voice echoed from her position on the boulder, a reminder that there was only so long to deal with this issue. Well, this went to hell pretty fast, huh? To Donald's surprise, Agent Quantum had a friendly tone, despite the tense situation. Sorry about Tashionic. I realize that you were trying to defuse things, and I appreciate it. We need to put it to bed now, before it gets into either team's head. We're facing a hard enough task as it is. Distractions aren't going to make things any easier. In a flicker, Agent Quantum's eyes went to Lodestar, who was perched unassumingly on her boulder as she waited. Limited or not, the idea of taking on a living legend was terrifying. If anyone wasn't fully in the fight mentally, the whole team would fall. No argument from me. The question is, what do we do? I'd like to find a resolution that puts this to bed, rather than potentially making it worse down the line. In under a minute. Sorry, I'm not that quick of a thinker, Agent Quantum replied. Best I've got is this, you take the first slot. I know you don't want it, which is how I'm going to sell it to my team. I'll tell them we let you go first so you could fall on your face in front of everyone, and then we can go put on a better display. You could tell yours that you're going to show these egotistical jerks, that's us, by going first and scoring a win, or whatever lights a fire under them best. We can't undo this, so let's at least make it motivational. Fallout will depend on whether you do well or not. This will get us through the evaluation, though. For someone who just described himself as not that quick of a thinker, Agent Quantum had certainly managed to come up with a comprehensive plan on the fly. It had the potential to cause more drama down the road, but Donald had to get them past one issue at a time. With the time limit bearing down, this was better than any of his own half-formed notions. Guess it'll have to work. Thanks for not making this harder than it had to be. My team is the one who started it. I'm only sorry you have to change your plans to accommodate the issue. For what it's worth, I've watched your team work, and I don't think Apollo had much influence at all. You've saved a lot of people in the time your team has been active, and I'm glad to have you counted among the superheroes. Agent Quantum offered his hand, and CyberGeek shook it. Their teams might have friction, but they could find mutual respect for one another. Eventually, the egos would smooth down and people would find common ground, so long as they saw that attitude flow from their leaders. While Agent Quantum walked back to his own team, CyberGeek motioned for his to come forward. Looks like we're taking the lead, he announced, loud enough for others to hear it too. As they crowded in close, CyberGeek summed up the situation as quickly as possible. They had to be nearly to the starting time by now. We're going first. Partly to keep the peace. Partly to test our limits. And partly because, if we go first and succeed, it sends a message about exactly why there was interest in us to start with. If we can win, that is. Are we good with that? The team nodded, almost in unison. It was a good thing they'd chosen a silent response, because seconds later, Lodestar's voice came bursting over the terrain. First team, your 10 minutes starts now. Despite the yell, they didn't immediately scramble off. 10 minutes wasn't long, but it also wasn't a total time crunch given the terrain they had to cover. Moving carefully, going slowly to be sure of each action offered superior chances of success than going as fast as possible. That might get them more bites at the apple, but they'd all be long shots. Better to have fewer chances with higher potential for success. That was the idea, anyway. Whether it worked or not was yet to be seen. Medley and Cold Shoulder, head on in. I'll start with ranged as soon as I get to the position. Hat trick, don't move until I've got suppressing fire going. This is Lodestar, even if she's holding back, we should assume it's going to take everything we have to keep her distracted. Once you're on the field, it's speed over everything. Keep moving. We'll have you covered.
There's a 25-minute slowdown on I-405 East in 0.5 miles. You are still on the best route.
Superheroes were so heavy that CyberGeek could feel them as he stood up straight. What would it be like to have the eyes of an entire city, country, even the world, trained on him, pitting the entirety of their hopes on his power? It was a weight impossible to imagine, yet the woman they were going up against had carried it many times over. If he ever wanted to reach that level, be capable of hauling such a burden, then this was the first step in getting stronger. To his own surprise, there was a bit of excitement in his gut, mixed in along with the nerves. Impossible task or not, he was about to spar with one of history's greatest superheroes, one he held a deep personal admiration for. Terrifying as that was on many levels, part of him was still Donald enough to appreciate that it was also fucking awesome. From this day on, he'd be able to say he tested himself again Lodestar. The only thing better would be getting to say they'd passed. Determination set, CyberGeek began to move and his team followed. Chapter 45. While her hearing was exceptional from a human perspective, Lodestar had to actually focus to tune into more distant sounds. It was a small mercy that allowed her some peace, because the louder the world grew, the harder it was to find the voices asking for help. Information had always been her limitation. She might win every fight, but that wasn't much help if she didn't know where the opponents were. That was part of why she enjoyed this method of training. Binding down her skills, limiting the information she had, this was a way to push her own capacity for quick thinking and improvisation. She hadn't been listening to the rookies as they made their plans. It would have given her forewarning, which worked against every aspect of the evaluation. Even without words, though, she caught the exchange between Apollo's old favorites and the new science entries. She didn't need super hearing to understand that friction. It was a dance every cape eventually grew familiar with. Egos and pissing matches were unavoidable when you were dealing with people this powerful. Sometimes, they laid the groundwork to amazing friendships. Other instances were the start of very long, dark rivalries. It was an issue she'd have to keep an eye on, one of the million things piled atop her plate. Seeing Medley and Cold Shoulder burst into view, coming at her simultaneously from opposite sides, Lodestar was slightly relieved. If they were opening with a coordinated strike, they must not be too rattled from the exchange. Medley was moving faster, and Cold Shoulder hadn't summoned her ice construct yet, so despite their timed arrival, they were likely trying something other than pure melee. There was no more time to speculate as Medley charged right at her, opening with a swing that could have cracked a telephone pole. She told them not to hold back. It was good to see this group understood she wasn't kidding. The blow whipped mightily through the air, but landed on nothing, as Lodestar easily jerked her head to the side, countering with a punch of her own to Medley's stomach. It sent him back a few feet, drawing coughs from his inhuman mouth. You're getting bad habits. Don't fight like you're always going to be stronger and tougher than the opponent. Eventually, you won't be, and you'll realize that learning some actual skills would have been really helpful. Medley leapt in again, launching an uncoordinated flurry. Cold Shoulder, meanwhile, was getting closer. Lodestar could see the blue power building up in her, could practically feel the chill radiating through the air. Was she going to try and encase Lodestar in ice? With these parameters, it might buy them a few seconds. That seemed like a waste of a strategy, unless one knew how powerful a few seconds in battle could truly be. As it turned out, Cold Shoulder was going for something even stranger. Leaping up just as Medley tried to charge at Lodestar, only to be knocked aside, Cold Shoulder came slamming down with both hands. A tremendous wave of blue energy washed out along the ground, quickly solidifying into ice. The southeast quarter of the battlefield turned into a makeshift skating rink, running right up to the edge of the stone sphere without quite making contact. Just as Lodestar was wondering what the hell that was about, she caught the first shot in her shoulder. Not bad. Decent power, good aim, and strong enough that even Cold Shoulder would have been knocked back in her armor. This team wasn't taking her lightly, thank goodness. There was nothing quite so demoralizing as having to fail a capable squad because they couldn't adjust to the challenge. She allowed herself to fall slightly back, toward the boulder, rubbing where she'd been hit like it stung. Cybergeek was up on a ridge. She could catch sight of his usual armor, along with the giant, oversized video game blaster responsible for the shot. That made 3 out of 4, and the trickiest card had yet to be played. Magic never quite made sense to Lodestar, regardless of how often she saw it in action. It was finicky, had few rules and even more exceptions, easy to underestimate until it wasn't. Something to watch for, between her more immediate concerns. Leaping onto the ice, Medley's claw sank in, giving him full traction. At the same time, Cold Shoulder let loose another blast of blue energy, surrounding herself with a living construct of ice. More shots rang out from Cybergeek, but they went wide. Probably trying to avoid hitting his teammates, Cybergeek was hardly a sniper. They'd gotten into a decent formation. Now, they were trying to turn up the pressure. 2-on-1 isn't a bad idea, but the trouble with fighting a single target is that, if they know what they're doing, they can use your own numbers against you. That was the extent of Lodestar's warning before Medley raced in, swinging wild again. Rather than swing back, she opted to drop low, ignoring gravity for a few moments as she swept her legs between Medley's, turning him into a tumbling ball of fur and scales. With one shove to his back, Lodestar reoriented his momentum, rolling her opponent directly at his chilly teammate. It should have ended with him slamming into Cold Shoulder's ice construct legs, except Medley was instantly scooped up in the gigantic ice hands that were dropped low and waiting. With the smooth expertise of someone who'd practiced this move for hours already, Cold Shoulder caught her teammate and chucked him directly back at Lodestar, claws first. Her short, terse reply as she hurled was all the explanation Lodestar needed, we know. A Medley-sized projectile was enough to drive Lodestar back when she had to play at this level, at least. It didn't stop with the launch, either. He came at her like a true wild animal, a fury of scratches and fangs. If not for Cold Shoulder's durability, Lodestar would have had to fall down under the assault. More shots rang out, most going wide, one taking her in the back. Cold Shoulder was right. They did know the risks of fighting a single target in a confined area, and had clearly trained for it. At last, Lodestar spotted what she'd been waiting for. Hat Trick appeared from behind a rocky outcropping, exactly opposite of place near the boulder where Lodestar was holding her ground. 3 for distraction, 1 to make the run. Not a bad play, especially since their runner had the wild card of magic to work with. With a quick motion, Lodestar fired a beam of energy into Hat Trick's legs, sending her tumbling over. That done, she floated a few inches off the ground, neutralizing Cold Shoulder's terrain trick. Medley's eyes went momentarily wild, but that was his own fault. She told them what powers were on the table. Part of the challenge was planning around them. It did no team any favors to hold back, because the people who fought with blood on the line surely wouldn't. A blast of ice energy nearly took her, but Lodestar dodged away in the nick of time, putting herself in the path of another energy shot. Dropping down like she'd taken a painful hit, Lodestar counted to 3 as she estimated how long Medley would need to recover from such an attack. The pause offered Cold Shoulder the chance to come in swinging, huge fists of ice smashing down on the ground. This was the greatest challenge of the group, in Lodestar's original estimations. Her ice construct was durable, thick, and could be repaired if she had time to focus. Worse, none of the other members hit hard enough to do serious damage. Thankfully, Cyber Geek had offered just the tool she needed. Dodging the huge fists, Lodestar took aim at the construct's knees, ensuring Cold Shoulder's actual body was nowhere near them. Firing off beams of energy at precisely the same intensity as what she'd been receiving, she saw cracks form immediately. The entire thing tottered precariously to the left for several seconds. Being big and strong is useful, but it also makes you the easiest target. Reinforce your weak points, or change the design to get around them. Just as Lodestar prepared to knock her over, Medley rushed in from the side. She readied for another flurry, only this was different. Instantly gone were the wild, animalistic strikes. Suddenly, Medley was holding himself carefully, entire body tense and waiting, even his tail extended, ready to attack. He came with a pair of punches that fell short, only for that tail to whip around and catch Lodestar in the leg. While the blow wasn't powerful enough to earn a serious reaction, he'd still scored it. Not bad, although I wish you'd started off like this. Would have let me see more of what you can do? Eye starting to Hat Trick, Lodestar noted that while she was staying low, the team's 4th member was still crawling steadily closer to the boulder. If she fired at this angle, Lodestar was most likely to hit Hat Trick's head, much too dangerous for a simple evaluation. But if she flew over, Medley and Cold Shoulder would have a clear path to the boulder. Once someone made contact, her job grew far more difficult. Now, she heard the order ring out just before she saw Medley drop into a ball, covering his ears and eyes. Turning, Lodestar made it just in time to witness Cold Shoulder falling out of the ice in the same position as Medley. That was all she got before the giant ball of light overhead exploded. This had to be something from a video game. No real-world item created a perfect sphere of noise and sound, crashing over victims in an effort to leave them helpless. Add in that it had clearly been fired from the ridge where Cyber Geek was perched, and the explanation was almost too obvious. None of it actually worked on Lodestar, of course, but based on what she knew of the others, they'd definitely be feeling the effects. Still, even with an attack like this, Medley's regeneration meant the impacted ears and eyes would get rapid, especially from such superficial damage. They'd earned roughly...
Nate Fuhr said, link to www.tiktok.com. Do you want to reply?
No.
Okay then.
10 seconds of stun Lodestar with that maneuver. Medley was the first up, to no one's surprise. He motioned to Hat Trick, who hopped up from the ground and sprinted for all she was worth. This was it, then. The muscle races in to occupy her, while Cyber Geek adds to the pressure with his range skills. Hat Trick comes running, knowing she'll be spotted, and gains ground slowly while the distraction team keeps up its work. When they can't hold the line anymore, Cyber Geek launches the stunning blast, giving Hat Trick a window of opportunity to make the big play. If she got the boulder inside that hat, they'd be able to move it with no concern for weight. While those two moved, Cold Shoulder leapt into action. Freed from her construct, she immediately fired blue energy at Lodestar, sealing the living legend to the ground and weighing her down with as much ice as possible. Smart, more delay, even when the stunning effects faded. It was a good, sound strategy overall. The only trouble was, the team didn't quite grasp their own strength. Much as she disliked this part, Lodestar had to impart the lesson, otherwise some criminal would, and not in so nearly kind a manner. With the 10 seconds up, Lodestar sprang into action. Medley's recovery means that even at full blast, the light show has already lost effect. She tore loose from the ice, slamming Cold Shoulder once in the gut, sending her tumbling over. That was your strength I used to break free and hit you back. Don't make yourself vulnerable in a fight unless there's a true need for it. Most enemies won't give you a chance to recover. With a burst of speed, she flew over to Medley, slamming him to the ground. She landed heavy, buying herself some time with fewer opponents. Cyber Geek has some rapid movement options, too, making it easy to get around the battlefield. That only left Lodestar and Hat Trick for the moment, the latter covered in dirt and panting from her undignified crawl. Lodestar respected that appearance. It was the look of someone who chose victory over vanity. In a way, she hated to do this. Showing the Marshal once their failings was educational. She wasn't sure what lessons Hat Trick could take from this exchange. It was a good effort, Lodestar said. Much more competent than most teams manage on their first go-round. Maybe so, but we aren't here to put in a good effort. We're here to give everything. Hat Trick reached into her pocket and produced a classic magician's wand, black with 2 white tips. It was the element of her power she'd used the least, which meant Lodestar had minimal information on what that magical implement was capable of. Lodestar darted forward, just as Hat Trick exclaimed, "Davi Chasm." An explosion of birds blasted Lodestar in the face, white feathers smacking into her nose and mouth, causing genuine annoyance, if not pain. She hacked and spit as the avian attack dissipated, her attention broken until the last of them cleared. By the time she could see properly, Hat Trick was nearly on top of her, a deck of cards in her hand. 5200 pickup. A torrent of playing cards washed over Lodestar, like a fire hose of rectangular plastic. The deck either didn't end or had some other enchanted elements, as card after card battered Lodestar's vision. All the others had gone for damage, whereas Hat Trick, their supposed runner, was using distraction. Something was wrong. She'd missed a detail, and it tickled the edge of her brain as she lunged forward, grabbing Hat Trick's wrists and angling the stream of cards away. Impressive, Lodestar admitted. That first one genuinely took me off balance for a few moments. Thanks. I'm not much of a magician yet, but I have worked really hard on mastering the most important part. Her hat was gone. That's what was off. As Lodestar looked down at the cape named Hat Trick, clasped in her grip, Lodestar noticed that the meta-magician's most distinctive accessory was missing. Spinning around, Lodestar realized something else a hair too late. She hadn't gotten shot in a few minutes. Already knowing what was waiting for her, Lodestar saw Cyber Geek land a few feet from the boulder, the giant jumping boot dissolving back into electricity and numbers. He scooped up the unmistakable top hat from where it was sliding gently along the icy ground, slamming his hand against the boulder to establish physical contact. Misdirection, Lodestar muttered. The heart of illusion is misdirection. But now, it's just a matter of catching him before he hauls it across the line. Even as she was speaking, Lodestar caught something else. Cyber Geek wasn't trying to put the boulder in the hat. Instead, he held his hand out underneath it. Hat Trick wiggled in her grip, making some sort of motion, and a silver device fell from the hat into Cyber Geek's extended hand. Not knowing what it could do, Lodestar opted to sprint. They'd clearly built their strategy around making this part work, so she had to assume it would end the session. To her own shock, Lodestar realized something as she ran. They baited her out to just the right distance. While she might be able to cross this far in a blink, none of them were fast enough to do the same. They'd estimated their own best speed, and specifically worked to draw her out farther than that. She definitely couldn't knock this group on self-analysis. Pushing as fast as she felt appropriate, Lodestar rushed forward while Cyber Geek wrapped his arm around the boulder and pressed the silver device. There was a flash of purple, and suddenly, he was gone, along with the stone sphere. An identical flash appeared over on the ridge where Cyber Geek had been shooting from, and seconds later, she saw him leap from the edge, boulder clutched in his hands as jets fired from the Blaster Bro's armor. From that far back, he easily cleared the line before Lodestar could even properly lift off the ground. Cyber Geek has an item that splits in two, and lets you jump back to wherever you leave the anchor. The issue was that it had a 10-second timer, but objects in my hat come out the same way they go in. Down to the second. Hat Trick was dusting herself off as Medley and Cold Shoulder staggered to their feet, shaking off those last blows. Was that okay? Are we allowed to combine powers like that? Not only are you allowed, it's exactly the sort of thinking these evaluations are meant to encourage, Lodestar replied. Awareness of their own abilities, and that of their team, to the point where they'd started developing combination techniques. While they might be low on raw power, this group had worked on their coordination to an incredible degree. Floating up into the sky, Lodestar saw the crowd milling around Cyber Geek and his prize, the boulder, dragged barely past the line in the ground. Attention everyone, the team of Cold Shoulder, Cyber Geek, Patrick, and Medley has successfully retrieved their target. Big round of congratulations to our opening group. I know it's never easy to be the first in a situation like this one. Everyone else, take 5 minutes to update your plans based on what you just saw while I reset the stage. She looked down, noting the looks of hope and determination. Now that they knew victory could be achieved, that should make for some bolder, interesting plays in the evaluations to come. Perhaps a part of her was excited by that. Playing with limited stakes was the closest she got to a challenge anymore. No harm in enjoying herself, so long as the education and evaluation continue to come first. After that, have the next team ready to go. Our day is only getting started. Chapter 46. Deep down, had always known this day would come. In a world of secret identities and masks, he'd long ago learned that few things truly stayed hidden forever. Part of him had even imagined giving the talk to his children when they became adults in an attempt to get ahead of the eventual revelation. He wondered if he have really had the strength to go through with it, or if this was always the way it would have gone down. Backed into telling the truth, his hand forced the secret pride from his grip. He and Rick sat in the living room, Ivan in a chair, his son on the couch. They both had drinks in front of them, because Ivan had needed to fill the minutes between getting Janet's call and her dropping off Rick. That had been a hell of a half hour, picturing what it would be like to come clean, all the horrified reactions it might garner. Yet upon Rick's arrival, they'd fallen into silence. Both knew what came next, and neither felt entirely sure of how to proceed. Ultimately, Ivan pushed things forward. He was the parent. It was his job to take the harder role. Your mother told me you have questions, and she let me know what they were about. I don't want to lie to you, son. I've never wanted to lie to you. What you're digging near isn't something minor, though. I hope you can understand that. But I also don't see what's to be gained by lying at this point. So, here is my bargain. I'll answer the questions you asked. There will be details I might leave out, and I think that once we're deep enough in for you to really grasp the situation, you'll understand why. That said, there is a caveat to this. What we discuss here can be talked about with your mother, and no one else. Especially not Beth. Rick bristled, pulling his back up straight. She's your daughter. If I have a right to know, then so does she. Beth is 12 years old, a child. She is in no way ready to grapple with this kind of topic. Ivan didn't need to sit straighter. He'd already been positioned properly from the start. This is non-negotiable. What we're going to discuss could put you in serious danger if the wrong people found out. You have to promise me, Rick. Look me in the eyes and swear you will not tell anyone else about this. After the fuss you've kicked up over me keeping you in the dark, I can't imagine you'd be hypocrite enough to break your word. The stubbornness in Ivan was reflected back at him in Rick's eyes. For a moment, he thought obstinance would win the day and the whole talk would fall apart. However, Rick also had his mother's skill for seeing the bigger picture. Swallowing his annoyance at being forced into something, he met Ivan's gaze. I promise, what we talk about here stays between me, you, and Mom. Maybe also a therapist, depending on how bad it is. That's a reasonable concession, and I know some people if it comes to that. Ivan agreed. All right, what do you want to know? Who are you? That came fast. It had been on a hair trigger. Ivan considered the question, and how to honestly answer it while still easing Rick into all of this. Ivan jerked. The first name came from the monsters who raised me. The second was chosen by the first real friend I ever made. I'm a manager at Vendela Industries, father to 2 children, and as of a few weeks ago, a Star Scoot cluster leader. He paused. That was part of who he was, and for a time, it would have been the whole truth. But even if he counted Fornax as who he'd been, there was still Pseudonym, who'd been too active as of late to entirely discount. Past that, I work with an organization that helps recovering criminals. Let's leave that there for the moment. It might be easier to discuss once some of the other holes are filled in. There was a sheen of sweat on Rick's forehead, despite the climate control in the townhouse. He rubbed his hands on his jeans, wiping away more perspiration. That question had been an easy one. He was still gathering courage for what he deemed truly scary. And who is Tori Rivas? No. Ivan halted the conversation midstrid. Who I am, what I've done, these are things that might impact your life, so I can see that you have a right to know them. The secrets of others don't fall under that umbrella. Tori is a friend and a coworker, someone I trust. Anything past that you can find out by asking her directly, though I'm not sure I would recommend it. The denial had brought Rick up short, but Ivan had left him little room for rebuttal. More hand-wiping, a little frantic now. Reaching over, Ivan put a hand on his son's shoulder. Ask me whatever it is that's eating at you. You'll feel better when it's out. That's not the impression I got from Mom, Rick muttered under his breath. Guess there's no point in avoiding it. I want to know what happened at the beach. I don't know which one, but when I was around 4 or 5 you were 5. It was a small coastal town named Sanchier, down in Florida. We used to go there on family trips. Janet's parents took her there as a child. It was something of a tradition. I liked that town. When Ivan's paw stretched into true silence, Rick leaned forward. Interesting as that is, it's not the part I'm asking about. What happened there? Why do I start to freak out when I think about it too much? Why can't I remember anything besides flashes of purple in the water? No more room for dodging. It was time to start giving Rick what he thought he wanted. While we were at the beach that day, some creatures appeared. A new species created by the carp conqueror, this aquatic, metahuman criminal with dreams of grandeur. They were mounting an assault, you see. Trying to take over the land world, as they phrased it. In the end, none of the details really mattered that much. They made a very crucial mistake early on that sent it all to hell. They threatened my family. He could still feel the warm air as carp conquerors awed, but laughter echoed over the sounds of fleeing beachgoers. First came the offer, help lead the charge. Then came the mistake, daring to cast a finger at Ivan's then wife and children, implying they might not survive the tide that would wash along the lands. Ivan couldn't remember things so well from that point on, just snippets. The rest of the details required diving into the Fornax side of himself, which this was definitely not the time for. What did you do when they threatened us? Rick was leaning forward so far, Ivan feared he might tumble from the couch. The poor boy looked ready to pop from nerves. This must have been eating at him for a long time. I neutralized the threat. That's not an answer. Tell me what happened already. Dad, please. With a quiet farewell to the simple, normal relationship they'd had, Ivan forced himself to tell Rick the truth. I slaughtered them all. One by one. First, they died fighting. Then, they died begging. By the end, it was mostly just screams. I tried to be quick, as merciful as possible, but when dealing with a new anatomy, you have to pulp everything to be sure they're dead. Within 3 minutes, the water was stained with their oozing purple blood. It was a strange progression, the emotions on Rick's face. Relief swept in, brief and beautiful, as his father's words confirmed that Rick wasn't, in fact, crazy. Then came the horror as the implications followed. With every word, the point was driven home harder, and the possibility that it was all a joke shrank. By the end, Rick no longer looked like he'd swallowed a live bee. Instead, he was growing pale, staring at Ivan like he'd unveiled himself as the avatar of death itself. Which wasn't as far from the truth as Ivan might have liked. What you're feeling right now is natural, son. The shock. The disbelief. The terror at what it all means. Understand this, it only gets harder from here. If the truth is really what you want, make sure you're ready to hear it. We don't need to do all of this in a single round. The expression on Rick's face grew more neutral as his mind went to work, properly adding in this new information to whatever he'd already been working with. If you really killed an invading force of metahumans, does that mean you have powers? Yes. Though not the kind that can be passed down. They're nothing like your sisters, those truly are a mystery. I've got a few tricks, but by and large, I mostly lean on my physical skills. Kind of bummer. I was really hoping graceful aging was part of our genetics, Rick admitted. He was falling into a familiar pattern with his dad, momentarily forgetting the revelation. Ivan could actually see when it popped up again in his perception. Rick's whole body shifted to a closed-off position. Must be pretty strong, to kill that many. Slaughtered, Ivan corrected. You can't call that meager resistance they offer to fight. I was a blade cutting through a field of wheat. Yes, Rick. I am strong. Not what I once was, but still quite dangerous. Rick was retreating a bit now, pushing into the couch's back cushions. If you killed that many people, shouldn't you have gone to jail? Details matter. I pushed back an army that was invading our soil and publicly declaring war. Can't prosecute on that without setting a dangerous standard for the case. The room was growing tense. Reality had started to sink in for Rick. His father was a killer, proud and efficient, at that. Still, the boy had courage. He pushed on, determined to get his answers. Is that why I can't remember? It was so bad I had to block it out. Partially, but you had some magical assistance. Ivan reached into his pocket and produced a small crystal bottle with pink liquid inside. This potion helps you forget things you don't want to remember. We gave you some that night, after hours of hysterical crying and fits. You saw something unimaginably terrible, and worse, you saw it committed by someone you loved. It would have been a lifelong trauma, so we gave you an out. But magic is tied to willpower, and the more you tried to remember, the weaker the effects became. Are you going to make me drink that? There was nothing subtle about it now. Rick was visibly moving further down the couch, away from Ivan. Carefully, Ivan picked the bottle back up and tucked it away. I was going to offer it, though that seems like a no. Even if I did force you to drink it, that wouldn't matter. As I said, it helps you forget things you don't want to remember. It could never do more than what you desired. Oh, yeah, I'm sure at age 5 I was making great decisions about which memories I might need to hang on to. And how convenient that keeping your secret worked out to be the best thing for me. Much as Ivan wanted to smack that train of thought aside, this was already a precarious situation. Anything less than true honesty in the moment might do more damage than could ever be mended, especially with the issue of eroded trust. In my heart, I really do believe that you are better off forgetting. But I'm far from a perfect person. It's very possible I allowed my own selfish desires to cloud my judgment on the issue. Because you're right, Rick. I didn't want you to stay that way. You wouldn't even get in the car with me. You screamed and screamed if I even came close. This, was the last thing I ever wanted. For me to know the truth. Even through the anger Rick was trying to project, Ivan could still see the true emotion lurking in his gaze. For my child to be afraid of me. For you to think, even for a moment, that I would ever hurt you, turn that side of myself in your direction? Almost everyone who knows me is scared of what I can do, what I represent, sometimes just me in general. Not you two. You ran to me for comfort whenever you were scared or hurt. You understood that there was nothing in this world I wouldn't do to keep you safe. Ivan stared at the fear in Rick's face, the terror he'd seen so many times in so many expressions. Never had it cut him so deeply. Things were going to be different from now on, but that didn't mean he wouldn't still try his best for as long as there was parenting left to do. Whatever you're thinking and feeling about this, understand that fundamentally, nothing has changed. To you, the discoveries are new, however, I've been this man all along. I'm the same Ivan you've known your whole life. It's just that now, I'm also more. None of that matters more to me than being your dad. I would tear the moon in half to keep you from harm. To Ivan's surprise, Rick uncoiled from his ball in the corner of the couch slightly. The boy looked dazed, and no wonder. With the roller coaster of emotions he was on, his brain was probably fried. After a moment of consideration, he spoke in a more controlled voice than any 16-year-old should be able to manage, given the circumstances. I think I need a break. We're not done. I want to know the rest, just maybe. Not today. A wise decision. One step at a time is the surest way to walk the path you're on. Ivan started forward to comfort Rick, but stopped when he caught the wince. No mistaking it, the shadow of fear now lay between them. Even though it broke his heart, Ivan pretended not to notice. That was his burden as the parent. And he intended to play that role for however long Rick would still let him. However, Ivan had a sinking suspicion that those days were severely limited. Chapter 47. Tori hadn't been to the main offices of Indigo Technologies before. She'd robbed a lab they owned, worked in a subsidiary, and rubbed elbows with the owner at the guild. However, she'd never had occasion to come see Wade Wyatt in the most official capacity of his civilian identity. What amazed her from the moment she touched foot in the lobby was the security, and the knowledge of how few people would be able to spot it. Sonic disruptor cannons masquerading as modern art, pulse bombs worked into the pot of every lush plant in the space, even the floor tiles gave off the telltale sheen of electrobind coating. Nothing here was entirely what it seemed, nor designed to serve only one purpose. Wade had built a fortress and made it look exactly as bland and unassuming as every other corporate office she'd had the misfortune to end up inside. Outside of the high-tech devices, it was still aesthetically pleasing, if one went in for that sort of thing, lots of metal and glass, loads of natural light. Today it hosted a fairly brisk crowd despite it being Saturday afternoon. After a morning whipping up some samples, Tori hoped she had enough progress to bring before Wade. It made sense to knock this out early, no point in redoing the work that was already out there, but she also felt somewhat underprepared. Perhaps she should have waited until there was a fully functional prototype. She shook the thought from her head. They needed to act fast, while Tori was still a news item. Once the spotlight faded, this became less effective. At least on that front, there was little need for concern. She caught sight of several photographers lurking near her apartment, though they seemed hesitant to get too close. Given the phrases Chloe used whenever she spotted one, the paparazzi probably thought it was cursed by some meta, which actually wasn't too far from the truth. It wasn't enough to deter them entirely, a fact that Tori found annoying overall, but would be useful in the short term. She'd even made sure not to slip away when coming here. Let them speculate what she was up to. It would only add more attention when she made her move. Making her way through the plush lobby, Tori strolled up to security, a thick-necked man with a sharp look in his wary eyes. He glanced up, taking in her oil-stained jeans and t-shirt that was only slightly cleaner. Name and appointment. No sense of judgment, which she supposed did track. Working in a cutting-edge tech firm, he'd no doubt seen plenty of the type who put work above things like fashion or hygiene. Tori Reeves, here to see Mr. Wade Wyatt. She'd been braced for skepticism, a furtive glance to be sure this really was the name on the appointment list. Not so much as a flicker. He absorbed the name like he'd been waiting all day to hear it. Identification. He held out a hand, into which she deposited her driver's license. The problem, Tori quickly realized, was that she'd been thinking of this encounter like she was visiting someone high in the company. But Wade wasn't high, he was the top. They knew his visitors' names already, those were likely memorized as soon as the appointment was logged. Come with me. Handing back her license, the guard hefted himself up, walking around the side of the thick security desk that Tori noticed was covertly reinforced. Something told her these guards were more than mere muscle, but then, she'd be reckless to assume anything different, knowing where she was. Together, they walked past the first bay of elevators, where a crowd of people in expensive clothing waited to board. They continued through a locked door that the guard buzzed them past, into a small, lush room with another guard and a single elevator. Unlike her first one, there was nothing front desk appropriate about this guard. He was bald, with tattoos running up and down his flesh. There was something else, impossible to put her finger on. Tori could simply smell her own kind. This one had seen danger. He might even be a guild member she had yet to encounter. The first guard left as soon as he deposited her, hustling back to his desk. Her new escort rose slowly from his chair. His eyes were virtually peeling her, scanning for any danger, threat, or other potential issue. Finally, after a full minute of wordless staring, he reached over and tapped the elevator's button. Go ahead. His voice was raspy, but surprisingly warm. Thanks. Do civilians get to meet you, too, or is it only the folks using my channels? In response, the tattoos flowed across his skin, stretching and warping, even rising from the flesh. Seconds later, she was looking at a respectably dressed fellow in a well-tailored business suit. I give them the professional face. It's uncomfortable to keep up, though, so I didn't bother with you. With a release of effort, the tattoos shifted back to their starting positions. Neat. Got a name I should know. He shook his head just as the elevator dinged its arrival. If you ever get my name, it means you've royally screwed up. Or we're friends, I suppose. One of those, then. Not a shocker, given the role he was filling in his downtime. Tori wasn't surprised. She'd seen Ivan get dispatched to slaughter an entire gang who'd crossed them. She was well aware the guild had operations like that. Still, didn't hurt to sow her own seeds of danger while she was around. Then I hope I get it the friendly way. And to prove it, I'll give you a piece of friendly advice. If I ever do fuck up, don't try to come calling. Let's just say someone already has dibs on that particular task, and they aren't the sort of person you want to jump in line. Warning noted. Good luck with your meeting. Those were the last words before the elevator doors whispered shut. The chrome elevator moved fast, especially considering how tall the building was. In shockingly short order, another ding sounded her arrival. The top floor of Indigo Technologies, the office of one man, Wade Wyatt. It was strange that Tori felt nervous, like she was meeting him for the first time again. She'd known him for months now. Except that wasn't quite true. Tori knew Dr. Mechanical. She and Wade Wyatt had barely interacted. Those dynamics were always different, and she'd never been especially adept at rolling with social challenges. Putting the doubt out of mind, Tori strolled onward through a set of frosted glass doors that could likely withstand a missile and into the large waiting area outside Wade's office. It was filled with high-end furniture that also still managed to be comfortable, greater proof than anyone should need that Wade was a super genius inventor. Sitting at a vast, white stone desk was one of the most unassuming women Tori had ever laid eyes on. Short, curly hair that already looked disheveled despite so much of the day remaining, an oversized cardigan with intentional cats and unintentional cat hair as decoration upon it, huge glasses that evoked the image of a dragonfly. She looked like the person who'd be trailing after her boss with an armful of falling receipts and a cup of half-spilled coffee. Tori was immediately suspicious. Big, muscle-bound guard. That made sense. So did the scary dude watching the elevator. But this set off every villain instinct Tori had. All those checks to make it this far, and the woman Wade had running the actual entry point was a normal, put-upon secretary. When someone worked that hard to appear mundane, it usually meant they had a hell of a secret tucked up their sleeve. Approaching with care, Tori put on her most respectful voice. "Good afternoon. I have an appointment with Mr. Wyatt." The secretary whipped her head up like she just noticed Tori's entrance, large eyes made even bigger by those comically oversized glasses. As she leapt up, her knee smacked the underside of the desk, eliciting what had to be a painful thump underneath. "Of course. Miss Rivas. Security radio to let us know you'd be heading up. Wait will be done in a few moments, just some private work to wrap up now that he knows you're here. Can I get you anything while you wait? Water, soda, we even have one of those fancy coffee machines in the break room. A water would be great." Much as she might like a bit of caffeine, her nerves were cranked up as things stood. Better to stay calm for what came next, and besides, she didn't want to be a bother. Not with someone this suspicious. From somewhere under the desk, her greeter popped open a concealed fridge and produced a small, cold bottle. "Have a seat anywhere you like, and if you need anything, just give me a shout. Name is Dolores, and it's a pleasure to meet you." Handing over the bottle, along with a handshake, Tori accepted both, then retreated to a white leather couch to wait for her appointment. She kept one eye on the door and one eye on Dolores, not quite sure what to expect from either. Not a bad day so far. After the first team succeeded, Lodestar had stopped 3 in a row before the next team scored victory. Of that failing batch, she'd probably still promote one of them up to harder tasks. Their failing had been execution more than planning, and that was an easier fix. Interestingly, despite kicking up a fuss at the outset, the new science sentries hadn't taken a turn yet. Lodestar already knew why. She could practically hear Professor Quantum's voice ringing in their heads. He'd have told them to make a strong impression, so if they couldn't open the show, they'd try to close it. First or last, both tended to stick in people's minds the most when they did something memorable. Of course, that was precisely the sort of thinking that was holding the new science sentries back, so perhaps this would be a good chance to demonstrate their failings. They weren't a bad team, not by a long shot. They were just working to catch up with everyone else. Because Professor Quantum had taught them his way, via the old methods, he built a team on pure strength and crowd appeal. Everyone else had come up through the new system, where the focus was placed on being the most effective superhero possible, especially when it came to protecting civilians. Until they thought about their image second and the job first, they would always end up a step behind. It galled her to imagine what sorts of feats those 4 could accomplish if they'd been properly instructed. With their power, they should be knocking out tasks several degrees past what anyone else here could be saddled with. Given how stressed the Aussie was getting as it was pulled in direction after direction, she could have really used the help too. Thankfully, after this evaluation, there would be a few more to pitch in. Perhaps the new science sentries would be among them. She'd have to see what sorts of tactics they employed. On the other hand, part of her felt bad for the team. This evaluation was going to be harder for them than anyone else, because their collective abilities were that much more powerful. Between Tashionic speed, Agent Quantum's toughness, and Plasmodia's raw power, Lodestar would have a lot more juice to wield during their session. The 5-minute rest was almost over, so Lodestar called out a quick warning, letting the next team know they'd be starting soon. There shouldn't be a whole lot of teams left, they had to be getting near the end. Once this was done, she'd have a debrief with Quorm to get his impressions. He'd been watching the whole ordeal back at base, then a few hours of patrol, and home to pick up Penelope. Ivan had said he might swing by, as well, so that meant a decent meal she didn't have to. A blast of searing energy tore across the battlefield, on a direct course for Lodestar. Having been lost in thought, she sped up her perception and considered for a moment whether it was appropriate to dodge or take the shot head-on. Once Lodestar realized who was firing, though, the decision became simple. Using speed on par with Tashionics, she zipped aside from Plasmodia's blast, arriving at the boulder a split second before Presto appeared just above it. Out of the gate, Big Finny, HRR, and PHH. Presto's declaration of success was cut short as Lodestar's hand wrapped around the back of his skull before he could lay a finger on their prize. "I'm pretty sure you can deal with this, but call if you need help." Lodestar grabbed Presto by the belt on the back of his costume, her free hand still holding his skull, which was pointed directly up to the open sky. "You've got a whip-smart mind under there, so try being less predictable. Also, while teleportation is great, yours is limited to line of sight. So don't ever let yourself get into a position like this one." With that, Lodestar hurled Presto into the sky, face first. He would eventually manage to spin around, hopefully killing off his momentum and recovering, but this would buy her some time without having to watch for rips in space. She could already see Tashionic racing across the field, with Agent Quantum following behind at a considerable distance. It was time for Lodestar to test the new science sentries. Chapter 48. She wasn't kept waiting long. In under 10 minutes, Wade called for her, and Dolores ushered Tori into an office with aspirations of being a museum. All along the walls were famous designs and inventions from great minds through history. Some were from the pre-meta creators. Tori spotted a Da Vinci diagram in a proud place of honor among the displays. There were also stranger, clearly meta bits, harder to identify unless one was the sort of person who knew which meta first discovered and broke the Elysium temporal limits. Wade had even displayed a pile of ashes labeled Edison contracts. Apparently, he held history's great credit thief in the same regard as most educated inventors. Tori could identify nearly every piece displayed in the huge office. She might be a woman of few passions, but this was definitely one of them. In the center of the room sat the man whose own creations outshone the displays by orders of magnitude. What Wade had built could have quite literally changed the world. Part of this meeting was to find out why it was that he hadn't, in fact, done just that. Tori was smart enough to clock that there had been several great meta-geniuses through the decades, some on the side of capes, some on the side of villains, yet the amount of technology available to the public remained steady, a slow, gradual increase like one would expect in normal development, with only a few errant spikes. That couldn't be a coincidence, and much like the Guild's code, Tori needed to know the rules before she started playing the game. Not because she necessarily planned to abide by them, but because it was important to know where the lines were. Breaking rules worked best when it was intentional, not due to ignorance. Tori, a pleasure to see you, Wade greeted her. He rose from his desk to shake her hand, then settled immediately back into his lush chair. She took one of the pair in front of his desk while Wade continued. The room is fortified, secured, and warded, so feel free to speak plainly. In these walls, I keep a tight schedule. We don't have time for double talk. Now then, Ivan said you wanted to consult with Indigo Technologies on something. I'm going to be straightforward. I took this meeting out of courtesy and respect, but understand that it is very unlikely I'm going to bring something from that world into this one. Splitting them apart is how I protect both. Concise, informative, and bluntly honest, it was so nice to be dealing with a fellow science-minded colleague. Much faster than playing the societal games of small talk and niceties. Reaching into her bag, Tori produced a small vial of green liquid, a small circular device, and a stack of pages covered in scrawling and sketches. Go ahead and look over the specs while I explain. You'll be able to figure them out quickly. Making sure she had everything set out, Tori started on the pitch she may or may not have rehearsed a few times in the mirror that morning. I've been thinking about what to do with my newfound sense of celebrity. There's no getting around it, not for some time, and while I was originally tempted to pull up and hope it faded, I've been considering another tactic. One to make use of the attention. Wade's face creased in momentary confusion as he flipped through the pages, then vanished as he found whatever detail had eluded him. Tori kept on going, sure that he was still taking in every word. I've made no bones about what my long-term goals are. I want to build my own company, turn my designs into reality. For a long time, that was it. I just knew I wanted that place to exist. But now, I think I'm starting to see the shape of it, a market I can serve, a need I can fill, and a way to leverage all this bad luck into exactly the right launching platform. After one last scan, Wade put the pages down. The device is interesting, though not especially groundbreaking in complexity. I find the compound you intend to fill it with far more fascinating, if it works as described. But what I find most interesting of all is that you've brought me such a proposal in the first place. Miss Rivas, outside of Ivan, there is likely no one in the guild who is more familiar with your past than me, so I am keenly aware of the lengths you've gone to avoid putting your work or trust in the hands of other people. To have you suddenly show up, asking for what I'm assuming to be help, if not outright partnership, is a tad confusing. He wasn't wrong. Tori's entire history was essentially example after example of fucking herself out of potential opportunities to avoid situations almost exactly like this one, handing off her work to a huge corporation to do whatever they pleased. Even now, the notion riled up part of her, causing a brief churn in her stomach. Thankfully, because it was such an obvious point, Tori had come prepared with an answer. Part of it is me learning from the guild. If I truly took nothing else from my education, I saw that even the most powerful leaders need people they trust to lean on. And the guild is also why I'm taking it to you. Frankly, if you were a normal business, this would be a non-starter, but I would hope there's going to be a level of respect here not present in most business dealings. Past all that, though, you're right, this is still very hard for me to do. That's why I brought you the product and pitch that I did. Alone, that's a neat gadget, one I'm sure you could easily rip off. It's only when you pair it with me that it becomes a highly marketable asset. Wade lifted an eyebrow. She captured his interest. Explain. In response, Tori's expression shifted. She wasn't much of an actor, but she could tap into real feelings well enough. There was no shortage of rage to be had at any moment. a lasting gift from the tragedy of her childhood, yet today, she needed something harder to show. Tori permitted a touch of fear onto her face, along with a rising tide of fury. When those bastards took me off the street, I felt helpless, like many of you out there watching have felt. Self-defense classes, training, awareness. I did everything right, and I still got snatched. The capes made it in time, sure, but what if they hadn't? How long are we going to trust our safety to people who might show up, if you're lucky? I'm tired of feeling helpless. Tired of being afraid. That's why I've partnered with Indigo Technologies to develop the Rivas line of personal defense devices. Non-lethal, unobtrusive tech designed to get you out of danger right away, not force you to wait for when a cape happens to be around. Understanding came swiftly. It wasn't an especially obtuse concept, especially for a mind like Wade Wyatt's. He muddled it over for several seconds, lifting up the vial of green liquid and turning it around in his hands. What he was searching for, she had no idea. All Tori could do was wait as he contemplated the proposal. It's not just the tech, it's the sales pitch. The capes got caught with their pants down on the civilian side, and as the first public kidnapping in so many years, you have a unique platform to speak on the failings of relying on superheroes. Based on the designs, you've got quite a few ways to weave these into compact mirrors, so I take it to mean we're targeting a predominantly female demographic, which would make your story all the more compelling. We start with a targeted demographic, then grow it out one, Tori corrected. Beginning there will play the best, given what happened to me. Then there's Beverly's designs, and the fact that women over 40 are currently the audience buying the least Indigo Technologies products. This gets you away into their pockets and starts building brand loyalty. I didn't come in here expecting a handout. This strategy opens up doors to a whole new market. Yes, I see you have quite a developed plan. So developed, in fact, I wonder where it is that I fit in. Your prototype is rough, yet plainly on the right path, and if this compound is as indicated, it will be extremely effective. You have the funds from your museum caper to handle the build, and national attention for free press. What do you need from Indigo? Despite Wade's assurances, Tori still swept the room, making sure no one was around to overhear them. Resources would help speed this along while I'm still a hot topic, but more than that, I need guidance. I've seen what you can build versus what you release. There's obviously some sort of unspoken cap on the technology we let out into the world. I kept this one as basic as possible to be safe, but more complex ideas will demand more complex designs. I don't want to start off with the FBI up my ass because I released some gizmo with a forbidden latch. Wade snickered, hiding it poorly behind his hand. Yes, I'm sure a latch is the device you'd want to squeeze more tech into. You aren't wrong, Miss Rivas. There are certain checks to ensure humanity doesn't get tech it isn't prepared for. However, a fair amount of it is simply the fact that the best inventors also have secret lives. I hold my top work back for the Guild, because to release it publicly would make it available to my enemies. Same for Professor Quantum and Tyranny. I presume. Wade didn't look uncertain often, yet at the mention of the mysterious ruler, his brow creased for a flicker of a moment. Part of Tori wished Tyranny had greater affiliation with the Guild. All she knew of the woman were rumors, admittedly, but they were quite impressive rumors nevertheless. Genius inventor who ruled an entire island nation with the strength of her mind and the power of her creations. Were her work more public, Tori might have picked a different inventing idol, but it was Dr. Mechanical whose creations were on display for all to see during his criminal enterprises. The same person she was on the verge of partnering with for a project, something Tori was actively working to keep from getting overly excited about. Wade soon continued. Occasionally, some inventor will start dealing matter liquidators out of a van, but they never have the reach or infrastructure to last long, and reverse engineering metatech is essentially a discipline in itself, one that very few have mastered. That is to say, it will be some time before you brush against the real technological ceiling. However, you should still give careful thought to the products you create. To steal one of Ivan's favorite turns of phrase, think of it like you're baking a cake. Once something goes in the mix, you can't take it out. Introduce new technology to society, and there's no undue function. Accidentally wreck an industry or bankrupt a country. Too bad. Whatever happens, you have to live with. That's an aspect always seriously moving forward, Tori replied. But for today, the design in question, do you see any major issues? The big trick there is the liquid, and good luck to anyone who tries to break that down. We can keep it proprietary. Very limited risk it would enter society at large. This one works. In theory. Wade tapped the half-formed prototype, setting down the vial next to it. I get why you came to me early. You needed to see if I was on board and had feedback about any lines you were crossing. But if we want to do your pitch, you need something in your hand. Something tangible to show you mean business. While we'll need to negotiate the details, I'm open to the idea of moving forward. The sooner, the better, though. We need the story to be fresh. Get me a working prototype, and we can see where that leads. Tori was so thrilled, she nearly knocked her chair over climbing up to shake his hand. Not only was her idea getting backing, Tori would be receiving help from one of the few other minds she genuinely admired. As she and Wade grasped hands, however, he continued speaking. Once we have that done, you're going to enroll in business courses. I know some online ones you can squeeze into your spare time. Given your brain, I imagine you'll be able to clear the coursework at an exceptional rate. She kept on shaking, even as the curious demand hit home. I'm not saying I won't. You don't ask for pointless tasks, but do you mind explaining why? Happily. First and foremost, if you intend to run a company one day, you should have that education, and potential investors will expect it from someone in such a core leadership role. He paused, a dark, more Dr. Mechanical look sliding across his face. The other reason is that if we're working together, I'm going to do my best to make the project a success. In the course of that, it's entirely possible you might see my leadership techniques, and we want a ready excuse if anyone asks you where some of your more creative problem-solving tactics come from. Those brilliant eyes were shining, countless schemes forming in the mind behind them, each waiting for the right chance to be turned loose. It had been a long few weeks, with more lows than highs, but standing in Wade's office, seeing the danger in his eyes, Tori found herself unexpectedly happy about the curious directions her life could often turn. Chapter 49 With Presto momentarily neutralized, Tashionic was the next impending threat. He tore along the ground, breaking all sorts of rules of the universe to truck along at impossible speeds, all without destroying the environment or himself. She could see it all, since Lodestar was more or less matching his speed perfectly. It took a touch of effort on her part. The kid was fast, at least when he was using his suit accessories for the power boost. It seemed like not many of the other capes had caught on that Tashionic needed the help, and evidently, he wasn't going to give the secret away during evaluation. The guy was coming full speed. Until he wasn't. At the very end of his approach, Tashionic suddenly skidded to a halt, digging his feet in to send a massive spray of rubble and dirt at Lodestar's face. It was similar to how Trix moved with the doves, except no one on that team had provided Lodestar with access to super speed. She didn't dart back, though, as he was no doubt predicting. Instead, Lodestar went up, directly over the wave of dirt. Behind, a searing blast of plasma tore through the space where she should have been. That was impressive. There was no way Plasmodia could track Tashionic's movements, so they must have both been counting down to make the attacks line up. This was definitely a team accustomed to working together, and their refined techniques showed it. Not that it mattered much when Lodestar went an unexpected direction, but adapting was part of a fight. Besides, by this point, she'd flown against every other team. They should have accounted for the possibility. Landing in less than a second, Lodestar retook her same position, waiting for Tashionic to approach. It wasn't much of a delay. He zoomed in the moment Plasmodia missed, launching a series of blows that were fast, efficient, and well-aimed. Lodestar only dodged a few, letting the rest fall ineffectually on her. Sorry, you're going to need to hit harder if you want to beat Agent Quantum's durability. Obviously. With that, Tashionic hopped back, landing at the side of Agent Quantum, who had just finished an incredibly fast sprint that still left him looking like a slowpoke. More or less the same composition as the first team, and many that followed, Lodestar realized. One at range, one to grab, two for melee. Would this have been their move if they'd gone first, or were they mimicking a successful team's tactics? There was nothing wrong with learning on the fly, however, testing unfamiliar formations often wasn't worth the trade-off. Better to stick with what the team could do well. On that front, Lodestar realized she might not need to worry, as Agent Quantum and Tashionic launched a perfectly coordinated attack. Tashionic went low, aiming for her legs and base, while Agent Quantum stayed high, ready to handle her fists and knock her down if she started to fly. An excellent strategy, with both of them holding near-perfect form. If nothing else, Professor Quantum had taught them to fight. Unfortunately, he taught them to fight his way, which was part of why Lodestar expected this evaluation to be especially tough on the new science sentries. With a casual movement, Lodestar stepped back, catching Tashionic as he pulled slightly ahead, hurling his whole body into the charging form of Agent Quantum. The two went down in a spray of limbs, hurrying to untangle themselves. While they struggled, Lodestar dashed back over to the boulder. A moment later, Presto appeared once more, hands outstretched. Again, when you suddenly stop screaming and cursing, that tips me off that you've recovered.